some of those with you today. This is God speaking through Moses to the people. And just as the people that were led out of Egypt were God's people, so are the people of the Lord who call themselves the church, the followers of Christ. And so these words work equally well for us. Verse 6, this is page 179 in your supplied Bibles, verse 6. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession. Out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth, it was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all people, but it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments for 1,000 generations, and repays to their face those who hate him by destroying them. He will not be slack with one who hates him. He will repay him to his face. You shall therefore be careful to do the commandment and the statutes and the rules that I command you today. And may God bless the reading of his word. Concerned that all that is good that God has done in and through the BFC over the years, there is an element where the enemy is trying to polarize, not to introduce false teaching so much as to allow little things to become big things, so that we're not so much a fellowship of churches, but we're a group of churches that are ruled by a certain mentality. And I won't go into all that. It's not edifying or anything like that, which is not to say I've turned on the denomination. I will say this, that I really feel, as hard as it was for me in many ways, I saw God at work, because I imagined it would be worse than it was. And because when I thought it had gotten really at its most difficult, some of the new folks, in ways that would have been unacceptable 20 years ago, expressed themselves and did so to the edification of the body. It was a busy conference. 3 new churches were received, one in Cape May Courthouse, New Jersey, one in a place called, what is that, Forks, something Forks?
Forks Community.
Forks Community Church. Is Forks the name of the town? Is Forks?
I don't know, but it's in Easton. The address is Easton.
And one other. Boy, am I so...
I can't remember.
There was another one. Pardon?
Was it one in Mexico?
No.
Topton?
Topton.
Redeemer?
Redeemer.
I don't remember. I'm just throwing out church.
No. I'll get that straight and tell you next week. But that's a record number for us in a given year. We also had 4 ordinations. 3 of the men were there. The 4th one, because of COVID and visas and all, was not able to come from Mexico. We were really looking forward to that, to ordain him. So officials of the denomination and such will be going down shortly, and they will hold an ordination for service for him down there, and we greatly rejoice. His name is Freddie Chi, and he is a sweet, sweet brother in Christ. We have 3 churches active in Mexico right now, and I think a 4th is on its way. So 3 of them are in the Yucatan, which is, if you know where that is, it's the bump out towards the Caribbean. Anyhow.
City Light.
City Light, oh, yes. City Light, that's Allentown. We had a church in Allentown, Anglo Church, for many, many years.
Redeemer.
Salem, and Salem became El Faro, a Spanish church, and El Faro became bilingual and eventually emerged as the Lighthouse, which is what El Faro means. And then in the last year has merged with another church with a very, very similar vision and passion to reach the urban community of Allentown for the Lord. So its name is City Lights, which kind of is a nice throwback to the Lighthouse days. It was, I think the other one was just called Allentown Bible Church or something like that. So they already have 2 pastors and 2 congregations. Together they're still not a huge church. And they were recently able to buy, was it a beauty school?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they have to take out all of the beauty school plumbing and stuff, and it's not actually in service yet, but they're a church, and that's great news. We were united in our desire to have something powerful to say in this day and age when the church is under great assault, and that's where some of the rub comes from. Where do we draw the line between that angry kind of response that stands outside of an abortion clinic and says nasty things to the women who just got an abortion, and the real kind that says, how are we going to provide adoption options if we encourage these ladies to go to term? You know, that's always been a struggle for Christians. It's much easier to yell than it is to do something pragmatic, something that really is meaningful, that really brings the gospel to the streets. And so my heart is in placing our heart communally before God and coming up with God answers for things, and not writing rules that then will enable us not to interact with the issue anymore. And that's a once over lightly statement until some of these things are finalized. I will report on them when they're finalized. But that's really where some of the struggle is coming from. I grew up a fundamentalist. Whenever there was a problem in church, we made a new rule. So we didn't have to deal with the problem again. But the problem of problems is that problems come in many shapes and sizes and may look like the same problem, but they're not the same problem. So you try to screw a lid on a jar that it doesn't fit, and what happens? Total and utter frustration, probably destroy a perfectly good lid. So I appreciate my fundamentalist forebears. I really passionately believe that they desired to serve God and follow Him, but they were sold on an approach that was pharisaical. You know, make a rule, live by this rule, and then you'll know you're doing the right thing. Life isn't that easy, you know? And some things change, and some things that, let's take a for instance. No one ever talked about gambling from the pulpit when I was a kid. In this day and age, when it's all over the media and you have a gazillion options to throw your money away, maybe the pulpit should be saying something about that. And I try not to yell at people who are gamblers or who use the sports things, or, you know, because I don't think that has a point. If God isn't yelling at their heart, my yelling isn't going to do any good. But I do want people to understand that you got to stop and ask yourself, why am I gambling? Well, you want to turn an easy buck. Why do you want to turn an easy buck? Because either you're lazy, which is a sin, or you're not trusting God to provide as God said He would. So you're going to trust the state lottery to give you things that God has denied you. You know what? God probably has a very good reason for denying you. Carolyn and I sometimes have talked over the years of the ministries we've had. is, oh, if we only had $1 million. And then after a while, you begin to ask yourself, would I have done the right thing with $1 million? And am I upset with God that he didn't trust me with his $1 million? But God knows best. And it's not always about whether he trusts me with his money, it's whether he's going to display his glory another way. Okay? So, I want to go only as far as the scripture goes on any issue. But I love the fact that we have the biblical principles for living. Because those principles look at the scripture and say, what is the tenor of scripture? What is it generally saying to us that applies to life as we know it now? And then we are obligated to apply it. Okay? So just keep praying for the fellowship of churches. It's a good fellowship. I'm not going to sell you on another one. I'm not. There's a part of me that's still independent church anyhow. But this is a good fellowship. And that's why it needs the prayer of God's good people, that we do right. Okay? Right now, I've been asked to stay on the committee that I work with for another year. Pray that God helps me make the right decision. Okay? And that's my report. This is what I meant about little chunks of this and that. Okay? Another little chunk I was going to share, I'll mention at the end of the message this morning, but I kind of laid the groundwork for it downstairs, so I won't belabor it as much up here. You may remember that the last time we were together in John 7, we were looking at this phenomenon that human beings are human beings, and they look at things differently. Some people look and see a person for their ethnic or national background. Some people are actually pretty free of that kind of thing. Some people look and see dollar signs and some people don't. It's just the way we are. Some people notice whether you're tall or thin or fat or short. Most of us do at some level anyhow. And some of us make a lot of decisions on that before we even open our mouths to say hello to a person. So people respond differently. So it's not surprising that when the Son of God came into this world as a totally uncategorizable, how's that hard word? No way to put him in a box because there's no box that could contain him. It's not surprising that they had a hard time coming up with a unified view of who this is and what he represents. So last time we saw the fact that the chapter began with people who wanted to put him to death, and that baggage is carried through this chapter. It has to do with what happened in chapter 5 where he healed a paralytic on the Sabbath. He had brothers who said if you're going to go about doing the things that you do, take it to Jerusalem, be popular there. The subtext of that, I think, was, and leave us alone. Because the text also tells us the brothers didn't believe in him yet. They came to believe in him, but not yet. And then people went back and forth, he's a good man, or no, he's a deceiver. We saw that in verse 10 and following. He had followers who were afraid to do so openly, verse 13. He doesn't have the right credentials. That's one of my favorite things, because in the church, we can sometimes be like that. The way a man or a woman lives, the way they serve the Lord their God, that's their credentials. Yes, we have titles like elder and pastor and deacon and other things, and janitor and what have you. But that's not who we are. In those things, even in the scriptures, we're taught it's about what we are. So if I'm an elder, I'm supposed to be apt to teach. I'm supposed to be gracious. I'm supposed to be hospitable. My wife is supposed to be hospitable. These are character issues. They are not my resume. God does not care about any degrees I may have. Peter had no degrees whatever, except he probably still smelled of fish years later. And God mightily used Peter. Right? God uses us by the power of His Holy Spirit. And He can take an illiterate man and make him a great preacher. And He also takes seminary graduates and uses some of them too. Some of them. But Jesus didn't have the right credentials. He hadn't sat under the right rabbis. Paul did when he was known as Saul. And what did he do? Persecuted the church, killing some of them. So credentials are not everything. He taught them not to judge by appearances, by His own example. There were those who thought it through. Verse 25 and following were trying to figure it out. They knew that he was at odds with the leadership, but they also saw that he was standing out there speaking openly and no one was doing anything about it. And they wondered if that meant that the authorities didn't mind so much. And we'll pick up in verse 27. If you will, with me, verse 27. Here's an interesting thing. The crowd is speaking, the people of Jerusalem are speaking. But we know that this man we know where this man comes from, and when the Christ appears, no one will know where he comes from. Verse 28. Jesus proclaimed as he taught in the temple, "You know me, and you know where I come from, but I have not come of my own accord. He who sent me is true, and him you do not know. I know him, for I come from him, and he sent me." So they were seeking to arrest him. They didn't like that. The idea that the Christ would be one who appeared on the pages of history, boom, and no one knew anything about his background and didn't ask into it, comes from a misinterpretation of a verse in Malachi, chapter 3, where it says he will appear on the mountain, and in Jerusalem, the holy mountain, and he will. The second return of Christ involves him putting his foot down on that mountain. But appearing suddenly is not the same thing as appearing out of context. You know? It's not like, you didn't know I was here. Here I am. It's not that. Every eye shall see him, and they will, even the Jews will look upon the one that they have crucified. It's not going to be a great mystery time. And their response to that, of course, was to seek to arrest him. And there's this roller coaster going on through this whole chapter of John 7, back and forth between the extremes of wanting to follow him to the ends of the earth and those who want to see him ended on this earth. But it didn't happen, verse 30 tells us, because his hour had not yet come. What's that about? I think most of you know, but let's remind ourselves that who is the Lord of time? God is the Lord of time. What happens and surprises God on the timeline? Nothing. So, later Paul would write, who, when the fullness of time was come, was born under the law. And there are several books that were written, especially in the 1800s, fabulous books in the 1800s. I should finish a word set. in the 1800s about all of the ways in which the coming of Christ not only fulfilled prophecy, but fulfilled it only because that one moment in time was suited for its fulfillment. The kind of capital punishment that was being used fit the Old Testament prophecies, but it was also something that was limited in its use in human history, and on and on and on like that. So his hour has not come. Verse 31, yet many of the people believed in him, and they said, when Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has done? So on one side, there's people dealing with a bad interpretation of a verse in the Old Testament who said, well, you know, we know all about Jesus, where he comes from. And this group who says, well, okay, let's say the Christ appears suddenly. That's kind of, you can add that word in there. Could he possibly be a better candidate for the Messiah than this one? Who controls the elements, who heals men's diseases? Which, of course, the psalmist, way back in Psalm 103, you know, who heals all our diseases. He's the great healer. And so there's the roller coaster again. Now look at this. So the question becomes, what to do? What to do about Jesus? Verse 32, the Pharisees heard the crowd muttering these things about him, and the chief priests and Pharisees sent officers to arrest him. Okay, so they've now taken action. They're going to arrest him. And Jesus then said, I will be with you a little longer, and then I'm going to him who sent me. You will seek me, and you will not find me. Where I am, you cannot come. And the Jews said to one another, where does this man intend to go that we will not find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion? It means the Jews that were dispersed under the Assyrian and Babylonian times among the Greeks and teach the Greeks. And right then they're talking about Greek-speaking Jews is really what they had in mind. It would never occur to them that Jesus would go and speak to Greeks. Yeah. What does he mean by saying, you will seek me and you will not find me? And where I am, you cannot come. So there were those that were sent to arrest him. There were those who couldn't figure it out, who were trying to, but couldn't figure it out. Skip the next paragraph. We'll come back to that. Verse 40. And when the people heard what Jesus said, some of the people said, this really is the prophet. And others said, this is the Christ. Those are two Old Testament options, by the way. In Deuteronomy, Moses tells us that another prophet like him was going to come. That was a promise. What most people reading the Old Testament up to that time didn't realize, that the one who was coming would be prophet, priest, and king. And those are the offices of our God, and they are the offices of Christ. He is the prophet, capital P. He is the king, King of Kings. And he is the one mediator between God and man. His name is Christ Jesus. And so this is the Christ. And they look for the Christ to be, of course, a great leader. Potentially, most of them, anyhow, that great leader would lead them out of bondage to Rome. But some said, is the Christ to come from Galilee? Has not the Scripture said that Christ comes from the offspring of David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David was? See, Luke hadn't been published yet. People didn't, you know, I read one footnote in a Bible whose footnotes you and I heard, who blamed the authorities for not doing their research and not finding out that Jesus came from Bethlehem. I don't see any reason why they would do that. You know? There was never any mystery about the fact that he grew up in Nazareth, so why ask? People didn't move very far from home in those days. Some people never got outside of the village they were born in to die. That's just it. But these people are asking a legitimate question. They know the Scriptures, and they don't understand how Jesus fits that. They're not his enemies, they're just inquirers. But the end result, verse 43, is there was a division among the people over him. Some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him. So there were those who wanted to take action and those who didn't know what to do, so they didn't lay hands on him. The officers, and I love this, the officers, you understand, are the police force from the temple. That's basically what they are. These are not Roman officers. These are temple officers. The Roman officers would never come looking for him at the behest of the leaders of Israel unless they got somebody like Pilate involved first. The officers then came to the chief priests and Pharisees and said to them, "Why didn't you bring him? There's somebody not with you. Where is he?" And the officers answered, "No one ever spoke like this man." They came back stymied. People who spent their days on the mountain listening to Jewish leaders going, "Wait a minute, this is different." They were not spiritual leaders or Pharisees or Sadducees or any of that. They were just people who served on the Temple Mount, and for the first time in their life, they're hearing something new. And the Pharisees answered them, "Have you also been deceived?" You hear the frustration in that? I tried to put it in my voice. Have you also been deceived? What is the matter with you guys? Have any of the authorities of the Pharisees believed in him? Now, those of us who've read to this point from John, of course, are almost smirking, aren't we? Why? John 3. What happened in John 3? A ruler once came to Jesus by night to ask him the way of salvation. You know that one, right? Savior made answer in words, true and plain. Ye must be born again. And again, the same footnote says, well, he hadn't completely come over, but he did put in a good word for Jesus. I think he did. I don't think completely coming over would have meant leaving that body of leaders. And so he did what he could. And I will see what he did in a moment. But yes, people were already coming from all levels of society and educational backgrounds to Jesus, and if these people only knew, they would be appalled. But God was in control of timing. I think if they knew what was going on, they would have moved sooner. The panic would have come on them quicker and more deeply. But this crowd does not know the law, that does not know the law is a curse. Here's a footnote for you. If you have to put other people down to hold your position is questionable. They were Jewish leaders of the Jews. They're basically saying they don't agree with us, therefore they're under a curse. That's not only harsh, it's evil.
Yeah.
They're out there listening to him, trying to figure out what is going on, and you're sitting here judging it from a distance. And instead of doing your real job, you're allowing anger to be your boss. Nicodemus, who had gone to him before and who was one of them, said to them, "Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?" And they replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Search and see, no prophet comes from Galilee." You know, there's no better way to flush out sinful foolishness than to hold a mirror up to it. Nicodemus held up the mirror of what we call it, right practices. That, I forget, there's a better term for it. When we do things according to the law, in case something happens. But anyhow, right practices. And when they were to look in the mirror, instead of looking in the mirror, they put out this accusation, oh, you're just with him, or you're from Galilee. And no prophet comes from Galilee. These are the religious leaders of the nation, you understand. Jonah and Nahum came from Galilee. Shame, shame, everybody knows your name. You resort to ignorance. What comes out of your mouth, and I've experienced this so many times, when you're desperate to avoid the truth, is almost always stupidity. Things that you should know better. So, many opinions, one Christ. It wasn't Jesus that changed. All of these opinions are a reflection of different people, who they are and how they respond to the same phenomenon. In verse 37, I want to read this because on the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, the scriptures have said, out of his heart shall flow rivers of living water. Now he said this about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for as yet the Spirit had not been given, because Jesus had not yet been glorified. So John takes a break here to report on what was going on out of Jesus' mouth in those days, and also giving us some reflection about the fact that the Holy Spirit is coming upon the church at a later date. And when Jesus witnessed to the woman at the well, of course he said, I'll be in you like waters springing up. So there's that image is a God image. Rivers of living water. We who know and love Jesus and call him Savior, what are we to do? How should we respond to him? I think there's an old children's chorus. Everybody ought to know. Everybody ought to know who Jesus is. He's the lily of the valley. He's the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000. Everybody ought to know. And I love that chorus because basically saying, I wish everybody knew what I knew. You notice there's not a lot of real gospel in that. There's Bible in it, but there's not a lot of gospel. So we're not singing about everybody needs to know that they're a sinner and repent, and they do. But my heart's desire, as one who knows Jesus, goes beyond that and says, oh, may the springs of living water flow in this community, out of all my neighbors. Oh, God, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? So for us, and we were talking, this is what we were talking downstairs, we have to hold on to that passion because we know who Jesus is. But we also know what knowing Jesus can be. A wonderful, wonderful life with promise for all eternity. We're not going to arrest him, and we're not going to just believe in him. We're going to live for him. We're going to live for him. And we're going to live for him out there. As long as God gives us breath, we're going to live out there so that men and women, boys and girls can come to know him and come into him and into his church. Whether it be this one or one of the other Wissinoming churches that believes that our God is alive and coming again. Our job is to tell the story. God's job is to apply it. Amen? So, we're going to do that thing that we talked about, those couple of things. We're going to add other neighbors to our prayer on the first Sunday of the month. We're going to go to Charlie's. I'm talking now to Alice because she wasn't with us. We're going to go to Charlie's, and then we'll go to the neighbor next door, and the neighbor next door, and progressively until we've gotten Van Kirk and Cottage covered, and then ask the Lord what to do next. We're also going to take some other actions which we will let people know about when we're ready to take them. Anyhow, I'm sorry I kept you so long. You'd almost think we had communion, but we did, didn't we?